is going on with these low light shots? I love how they've got everyone just going like this because no one can understand why that looks so bad. So it's here as a photographer, one of my favorite videos of the year from MKBHD. This of course is the blind camera smartphone test. I'm thoroughly excited to watch it and go through it and analyze some of the results for you guys. Before we kick off, as ever, a absolutely massive props to MKBHD and the team. This is no small feat to do. First of all, actually building the kind of logic behind the website, setting up the voting mechanism. The team absolutely smash it out the park every single year and give us photographers and obviously of course smartphone enthusiasts one of the most exciting or interesting data sets available to us. Just before we get into it, a quick side note, the Pixel 7a giveaway is just about to end. That will also be linked down below in the description because spoiler alert, the Pixel 7a does very well throughout this comparison.
Alright, y'all have waited patiently for this. Once again, this year we've run our blind smartphone camera test. What if we took a bunch of the best smartphone cameras on the planet and took them out into the real world and took the exact same photo with each and every one of them, and then had you, the public, vote on which one's photos you like the best?
There's a few interesting things to unpick here briefly. First of all is that of course this is based on subjective public opinion, and Marquez does go into this a little bit later and gives us some really interesting insights. First and foremost is that the public like to go for essentially the brightest image within a limit of being overexposed. The public will actually almost always choose an image that is kind of at the higher end of the exposure scale, even if actually everything in that image is not quite as nice.
This year we took these 20 smartphones.
So these are the phones. I've kind of tested the most significant handful of these. And so I've tested like the Pixel 8 Pro, the Pixel 7a, the iPhone 15 Pro, the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. There are definitely a lot of phones on this list that I haven't tested because I don't get every single smartphone sent to me. But this is a great data set.
Then we went out and took the same 3 photos with each one. One daytime photo, one low light photo, and one portrait mode photo. Yes, it is surprisingly hard to stay perfectly still for 20 identical photos to be taken in a row, but I did it for you.
Good job, Marquez. That's taking one for the team right there.
And then upload them to a site that we've built that lets us put them side by side for you guys to vote on head-to-heads millions and millions and millions of times.
So this mechanism is similar to last year. They've not kind of messed with the kind of testing process all that much. If it ain't broken, don't fix it.
So the data our site spits out all comes in these text files with matchup ratings for every single combination of smartphones.
I said it last year, but man, oh man, there is a reason I'm not into statistics. I'm into things like photography, video creation. I can appreciate statistics, but this is a lot of detail for me.
For the regular daylight photos, we kind of had it set up with just me sitting in front of this window here, but there's a lot to this photo. The strongest light is from inside the room, but then the window light is actually a good test of dynamic range. And then there's also a variety of colors. There's my skin tone. There's the orange chair next to the blue pillow.
100%. There's a lot going on in this image, and it is a very useful test for a smartphone photo. I think resoundingly, the dynamic range aspect of this image is certainly the most important and the most interesting because there are a lot of these smartphone cameras, and it is a horrible tendency, in my opinion, that smartphones want everything in the image to be exposed. And obviously, some camera manufacturers will actually want this more than other camera manufacturers. And basically what that means is it will present these kind of images where everything in the frame is like dipped or raised to allow an even exposure. And in my opinion, that's not how professional cameras handle images. And it is actually a big giveaway for a smartphone photo. So it's interesting to see which of these phones actually spit out an image that looks like that or one that looks more higher end.
Every single phone, we try to frame the exact same way from the exact same spot, holding one of them up as a reference so we can get as close as possible. And everything is fully auto. We just open the camera app, make sure the lens is clean, and just hit the shutter button.
Every single year, I think about how they could potentially make this test actually a little bit more scientifically accurate, but I do come back to some challenges with this test. Like for instance, if you were to use a tripod, obviously not really possible with 20 plus phones, but you could mount a phone tripod in a kind of a static position, but you have the challenge that each phone often use a different focal length, so you're not actually going to get an image that is identical on every phone. It is certainly a challenge, and probably the way they're doing this is actually the best way.
So for this regular daylight photo situation, the winner with the highest ELO rating is the Pixel 7a.
What did I say about the Pixel 7a?
That's pretty impressive. So this is the photo.
And this certainly is illustrative of kind of what I was talking about earlier. First of all, the public like brighter exposures, and the Pixel has had years and years of getting good sensor data from that sensor they've been using for quite a few years now. And I would say that the Pixel does do this thing of kind of keeping everything relatively exposed. I mentioned that in my Pixel 8 Pro review, and a lot of the exposure software that they'll be using are similar between those two phones. But what I would say is that Google have probably got this closer than any other camera manufacturer. They definitely do this thing where they pull the exposures down and up to create an even exposure of the image, but they definitely do this in a way that's slightly more acceptable to the eye, and things do end up looking like a more professional shot as opposed to some of these images, which, as you can see, this is just not how things look in the real world.
And it's also not a fluke, because the second highest ELO rating came from the Pixel Fold. So the Fold took a very similar photo, and then finishing up on the podium
Yeah, so the fact that the Fold is also kind of a similar range here, that kind of is illustrative of what I was talking about. The Pixels all use the kind of a similar computational photo engine, and certainly these images do come out looking very similar.
Was the OnePlus Open, one of those high-end folding phones.
I haven't tested the OnePlus Open. It's been a while since I've tested a OnePlus phone in general. Who knows, maybe I'll have to try and get my hands on one soon.
My personal favorite photo, and the one that actually won for me when I blind tested myself, was this one. This is the fourth highest ELO rating. This is the OnePlus 11. It's definitely a little on the...
Okay, so Marquez's winner for himself was a OnePlus One. In terms of my results for the daylight photo, we'll go over these as we're going. My daylight winner was actually the Samsung Galaxy S23, which is like really interesting. The OnePlus 11 was third, so that was in line with Marquez's choices, and also the Google Pixel 7a coming in at number 2 for me. So it's certainly keeping things relatively consistent here.
A lot of people pointed out that the sun behind me, looked a little different in each photo. It might have been setting, so the background was a little different, which is a little bit true, but it wasn't late enough in the day for that to actually affect the photo. I think the fact that the 7A is the only one...
This is certainly a consideration, and it's one area I think the team could be slightly more scientific, albeit I do agree massively that it's a challenge to shoot 20 phones. If they did it over a 6-minute period, the light shouldn't be too dramatically different, but the fact that the light potentially is actually shining into the camera sensor on some of these phones and not on others certainly could have affected things slightly.
And then fun fact, in dead last, with the absolute bottom lowest ELO rating for this daytime photo, was the iPhone 15 Pro.
No way.
Not a terrible photo. I mean, you can't really get a horrible photo in normal looking lighting for most of these smartphones, but when you put it up against the others, it's mostly just the darkest one.
Wow, that is so interesting. I'm so surprised that the iPhone 15 Pro was so low. The iPhone 15 Pro, this phone right here, is one of my favorite camera systems from the year. It is generally a really consistent, solid performer, so I'm super surprised that it actually ended up here on the list.
Put it up side by side against these much brighter photos, people just picked the brighter one almost every single time.
I think a big thing going on here is skin tones. I think something that is maybe not considered enough is that Google has a feature called True Tone, which is actually built specifically for people with darker skin tones. And what it basically is an algorithm or a piece of tech that actually aims to expose people with darker skin tones and produce a more accurate looking image for those skin tones. The iPhone famously is not very consistent when it comes to shooting people with darker skin tones, so there's definitely something going on here. You can see it like just side by side here. The Pixel 7a looks great and certainly much more accurate. The iPhone 15 Pro hasn't nailed the exposure on Marquez's face.
Funnily enough, though, you can absolutely overexpose for this competition, as the second lowest ELO rating belongs to the Galaxy S23 Ultra for producing this weirdly overexposed masterpiece.
Okay, so again, this is interesting. My winner was the S23 and not the S23 Ultra, but it's interesting to see that you've got two of the kind of leading smartphones of the year, one underexposing dramatically and one overexposing dramatically.
So low light. Low light is a much more challenging shot for a smartphone camera, especially with a tiny sensor and tiny optics. And if you're ready for the plot twist, the highest overall ELO rating for the low light photo comes from, dead last from the daylight photo, it is, again, the iPhone 15 Pro.
This isn't surprising to me. The iPhone 15 Pro has a fantastic low light system. This is one area where the kind of consistency is going to come out. I think the iPhone and the Pixel are two of the leading smartphone cameras when it comes to low light performance right now, and that would certainly be backed up by these numbers.
With another Totally reasonable photo.
I think the market is using this language intentionally here because the iPhone 15 Pro is just a thoroughly solid performer, except with that daylight photo, which I'm not totally sure as to what was going on there. But like overall, the iPhone as a camera system will produce a solid result most of the time.
Now, following it very closely in second place was the Pixel 8 Pro, and actually the Pixel 7a coming in third.
There we go. That was kind of what I was suggesting. The iPhone with the Pixels right behind.
It's starting to get ridiculous how much some of the other smartphone cameras started to pump up the light. Like literally the second you get outside the top 4, you get straight into bad HDR territory. Like this is the fifth place photo from S23 Ultra.
The S23 Ultra is not a bad low light camera necessarily, as long as you shoot in that 12 megapixel mode as opposed to using the full 200 megapixels, but it's definitely not as strong as the others.
Which is definitely too bright, and also you can see this little HDR halo-y effect starting to show up around my head. And then if you scroll all the way down to the Oppo Find X6 Pro, ooh, my God, what happened?
What is going on with these low light shots, man? I feel like they're worse than last year.
Like these cameras are going nuts. It looks like in this one they literally painted sloppily over me and just dragged up the exposure. Matter of fact, yep, see? That's exactly what it looks like.
I love that. That's so accurately representing what is going on here. Like they're using kind of like an AI masking tech to figure out where the subject is in the photos, and it's boosting that exposure without you having any manual control over it. That's a big, big problem. Like give us manual control over these types of things. You don't want an image that looks like this. And this is a bit of a problem, is that the iPhone does this as well, and it doesn't always do it in low light. You have this kind of post-processing thing that is applied to faces, and it will naturally bump the exposure, and it's not something you always want.
The Zenfone did this too, along with a few others.
Man, so these low light images are bad. This is a super interesting selection of images because, like, yeah, outside the top 4, they all look janky as hell.
Here are all the nighttime photos and their ELO ratings. Pause it if you need it.
It's so interesting, you kind of get a sliding scale from actually darker through to brighter for this particular image. The pixels probably do the best job in terms of actually representing nighttime while sort of exposing the subject in a way that things actually would look accurate or suitable. But yeah, certainly on some of these images, what is going on? In terms of my winners for the low light shot, it's interesting that the pixels were nowhere to be found, so that's an interesting thing that I'm kind of preaching how good the pixels are, but my random test did not go that way. The iPhone 15 Pro was the winner for me, so that was consistent. The OnePlus 11 was number 2, and then the Vivo X9 Pro came in at number 3.
And now we can move to the last but not least category, portrait mode. So portrait mode kind of turns out to be the hardest test like this to run because they all kind of do portrait mode a little bit differently. If you just open the camera app and switch to portrait mode, some of them do 2x, some of them are 3x. Some of them say 1x, but they're actually like 1.5x.
100% hard agree here. This is a really weird thing with smartphone cameras. I obviously test portrait mode like I do on any other camera system, and I run into this problem every time. If I'm trying to compare two camera systems, I'll have to be like 2 meters apart from where I might be otherwise. Like you can be shooting on a 3x mode, and that's kind of like the only option sometimes on some of these smartphones in portrait mode. But then obviously some are 1x, and my personal preference is that you at least use a 2x or 3x in portrait mode, because otherwise you end up with this like really wide looking shot with lots of blur, which just looks totally fake for me as a photographer.
And the portrait mode point and shoot winner with the highest ELO rating is the Pixel 8 Pro.
Okay, interesting, solid performance from the Pixel 8 Pro.
This was followed pretty closely by Samsung Z Fold 5, which I actually think had a better cutout.
So this is interesting, and this is what I just mentioned earlier. Like that, you wouldn't get that much blur on an image like that, because that is clearly like a 1x. It's taken up probably a 23mm focal range, but the background is very blurry. So those, for me, start looking really artificial.
And then the third highest ELO here was the iPhone 15 Pro, which I think had the most natural looking blur.
I think the iPhone, absolutely most accurate looking blur here. And again, this is my kind of personal preference for a portrait mode shot. That looks to me like a roughly 2x, around probably a 50mm focal length. And then the Pixel 8 Pro in the middle is probably a 3x zoom.
The losers here in this particular category were nothing like this. They were some of the wonkiest, weirdest photos in the entire competition. And
you can get some crazy looking results with portrait mode on some different phones.
And the loser with the absolute lowest ELO rating for this category, and actually in any category, was the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V.
Interesting. I've been asked to test consistently the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V. Everyone swears by it having a fantastic camera system, but I think these are two very important conversations, is that good hardware does not necessarily correlate to good software, and to be honest, software is actually more important when it comes to a smartphone camera. Hence why the Pixel 7a continues to constantly do so well.
With this photo. With
My God.
That's the photo?
Oh my God, that is an absolute shocker.
We all actually thought it was a mistake.
I love how they've got everyone in this frame like, just go like this, because no one can understand why that looks so bad. I mean, that is a shocking image for a modern smartphone camera, especially one that costs like over $1,200.
Take it again, it does it again. And then it did it again and again, so...
God, some of those are absolutely awful.
Anyway, here's all of the portrait mode photos and their ELO ratings. You're welcome.
In terms of my portrait results, my winner was actually the Oppo Find X6 Pro. Coming in at number 2 was the Samsung Galaxy S23. Again, not the S23 Ultra, interesting. And then the Google Pixel Fold. I personally don't love shooting portrait mode and I tend to pick holes in it, so it's probably no surprise that my results are a little bit weird.
I'd like to give out some awards. So we have our winners and losers in each of the 3 categories, which is cool, but if you average it all together, we have the highest overall average ELO rating. We'll call this one the People's Champ. And with the highest average of 1660, that's pretty competitive, it was the Pixel 7a. So this one won the daytime photo, as you probably remember, but then it also...
The Pixel 7a continuing to smash it. What is so interesting is that the Pixel 8 Pro doesn't compete above the 7a. Like, the 7a is obviously just such a solidly optimized camera hardware for their camera software. You'd think that the Pixel 8 Pro, using a lot of the similar kind of computational systems, should outperform it because the hardware is better, but it's interesting to see that that's just not the case.
But here's the kicker. The second highest average ELO rating was the Pixel 8 Pro. And the third highest average ELO rating, again, this is your votes, is the Pixel Fold.
Super interesting that the Pixel continues to do so well throughout these comparisons. I personally think it's just that camera software is so important on smartphones, and Google continues to be kind of almost at the top of that list. And they've had years of optimizing their brilliant software with their very, very acceptable hardware.
So pixel, pixel, pixel. It's a perfect pixel podium. So here you can see the whole list. From top to bottom, the 3 pixels at the top, surprisingly in reverse.
There's a few interesting ones here to pick out. First of all is that the iPhone 15, which you'd actually expect to be in line with like the Pixel 8 or the Pixel 7a in terms of performance. Coming in at number 15, that is not good performance for the iPhone 15. And then of course the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, one of the most kind of marketable cameras, like they make a big deal over the camera system on that phone, flat out number 20.
Then I also had to bring back the Bang for the Buck award. And so your winner again is going to be the Pixel 7a. This was a phone that launched right around $500.
Yeah, the Pixel 7a, I mean, what a camera for the price. I've reviewed that camera. That will be linked down below. And again, that giveaway is still open.
And then impressively, actually, the Sony is not dead last in this category. It is expensive and it did perform horribly, but not worse bang for the buck wise than a super expensive folding phone. The Z Flip 5 overall average.
It was always going to be a folding phone. Folding phones are very, very expensive. So if you don't have lots of votes like you potentially do have on the Pixel Fold, it's going to do badly in this category.
So what did we learn with all this? Well, I'll leave you with this. First of all, the Pixels killed it. They had the 1, 2, 3 finish. They're great bang for the buck. It was weird that they're in reverse price order, but fine. But also, there's a lot more to a smartphone camera, of course, than just a sitting down staged photo of a person. We learned a little bit about how it shoots my skin tone.
The skin tones thing is super interesting here. It'll be super interesting to see a shot maybe with one of the other team members or with Marquez and one of the other team members in the shot, so we could get a shot to see how all of the phones perform in shooting 2 different people's skin tones at once. And something I'd also like to see, and it's something which obviously lots of people shoot on their phone all the time, is like a landscape image. I think that would be really interesting. Actually take like humans out of it, see how we do on like a sunset image or a beach or a mountain view or something like that.
But at the end of the day, I think we were still pretty not shocked by the slightly brighter photos beating the slightly less bright photos. And maybe we'll run it back again next year and learn something new.
And then a hot take is this comment right here, and I've got a special place in my heart because I do these camera comparisons a lot here on the channel. You should add a DSLR in the blind test next year. I think this would be really interesting, is to actually throw just a few curveballs in there and see how those cameras actually did against maybe other point and shoots or other DSLR cameras. Just a couple sprinkled in might make things a little bit more spicy. And just like that, that's that for another year. One of my favorite videos of the year every year from the MKBH team. A massive thank you to them for doing it. I know that probably a lot of work goes into that video, so it is not underappreciated. If you made it to this point, stick around, subscribe. I'd love to hear what you think about this comparison down below, and I'll catch you guys next time.